G'day guys, welcome back to True Eagle. Today I thought we would take a little look at the upcoming 2024 draft. It's getting to that point of the season where we've certainly got one eye on the draft and a few trade rumors popping up and what we might do to try and improve this list. We've got a number of options. In today's video, I thought we would look at, in particular, at our first selection, which is currently pick 3. I think there's a chance we fall behind North Melbourne and get pick 2. Either way, I've compiled a list of about 8 prospects that are potentially going to be around the mark. 8 is excessive. Realistically, there's probably about 6 contenders that could realistically be possible selections for us. And that is actually just because the draft pool is so even. So either way, I've decided to expand it out to 8 for various reasons. And we'll go through a number of different players that I think could be options for us at our first selection. Now, there's a lot of things we could do with this pick. It may not end up being the pick that we use on the night. We could potentially trade this pick down. Alternatively as well, I've seen a report today, I think from Ryan Daniels, Tom Morris actually it was. Tom Morris reported that, Barras met with Hawthorn today. So I think there's a possibility that, we end up with another draft pick from Hawthorn. Regardless, we're going to talk about the top prospects in this draft as though we have pick 2 or 3. In the future, I'm thinking, I'll do another video looking at prospects probably from past pick 10, because if we trade down, those might be the sort of prospects we're looking at, as well if we end up with another draft pick through trading Barras or whatever. For the record, this video is going to be, looking at things from a West Coast Eagles lens, but if you're not a West Coast fan, this is still generally covering off a number of the top prospects in this year's draft. So I've got 8 here. I've got Josh Smiley, Finn O'Sullivan, Jagger Smith, Sid Draper, Harvey Langford, Sam Lela, or Lela, Murphy Reed, and Luke Trainer as possible selections. So let's go through them one by one. I will make some notable exclusions first, actually. So Levi Ashcroft is probably going to be one of the top picks in this year's draft. He's a father-son selection for the Brisbane Lions, which means he's not really going to be available for us. We could try and bid on him, but it's probably not going to get us anywhere. Same thing with Leonardo Lombard from the Gold Coast Suns. He's probably in this range on talent, but I'm going to exclude him for this video because he's not West Coast relevant. There's also Harry Armstrong, who's bolted up and could potentially be a top 10 selection, could bolt a little bit further. Being a key forward, I don't think he makes sense for West Coast. So again, another player that I'm not talking about in this particular video. So let's talk about the 8 players that I mentioned there, 7 of which are midfielders, 1 of which is a defender. So let's start with Josh Smiley. Now, Josh Smiley is a 194 centimeter midfielder from Vic Metro. Probably started this year as the number 1 candidates along with maybe Finn O'Sullivan. And, has been solid this year. I think he's dominated Coates Talent League, which is their under-18s competition. And in the championships, probably didn't have the same standard of performance that we've become accustomed to in the Coates Talent League. And that could be a few factors. The way I see it, I think Smiley really is a midfielder. Maybe you could play him a little bit behind the ball as a roaming defender as well. And I don't think he has genuine forward utility. And that's where he did play a little bit of the championships this year. He didn't take a contested mark in that time. And apparently his ball use, we went at 56% disposal efficiency by foot as well. So, he was solid. I think he averaged 19 touches and 6 clearances with some forward time as well, but overall probably didn't prove himself as a forward. Nonetheless, still a contender for number 1, let alone our first selection. And what he does bring is a very, very powerfully built midfielder at stoppages. Very good at getting the ball out, and generally I think his ball use is pretty good despite what the numbers say from the championships. This kid is huge, 194 centimeters. Like I've said in previous videos, I'm pretty sure that measurement was taken at the end of last year. So I think come by the end of the season, he could be pushing 2 meters tall as a genuine midfielder. And I've got no real doubt about his ability to be a good clearance midfielder. His positioning at stoppages is really solid. He's good at getting the ball out. His ball use is solid. He probably just doesn't have that dual position ability like, some other 6'5" midfielders that you see. Someone like a Bontempelli, for instance, is really strong overhead. Smiley probably isn't that, but he is still a very good midfielder and probably a little bit comparable to Paddy Cripps. Now, am I thinking that he is the best fit for us? Probably not. I look at what we've already assembled in the midfield that we've, drafted for, and you've got Jinby, who's 6'3", Reed and Hewitt are 6'2", Clay Hall's 190 centimeters, Jai Culley, if he's still on the list, is 6'4". In other words, we don't necessarily need another big-bodied midfielder that wins clearances like Smiley. So he's not my first choice, but he would be a worthy addition to pretty much any young midfield at the moment. Now let's talk about Finn O'Sullivan. He is a player that I am more hopeful that we select, and he is the cousin of Sam Walsh from Vic Country. He's 182 centimeters. Again, that could grow to about 6'1", you'd think. So again, another player who probably started the year as one of the hottest favourites for the number 1 selection, but due to injury, hasn't really got his game going this year. Missed a bunch of games with a thumb injury and another 7 weeks with a finger injury, apparently, which saw him get surgery. And, having hand injuries is annoying as a footballer because you can probably run, right? But you can't do anything skill-wise. So he only played the last 2 games of the championships, missed a whole stack of footy this year, which is kind of a common thread for a lot of the best contenders from last year. What I do like about O'Sullivan is probably, the running power is probably something that we need, someone who can genuinely accumulate the footy. That's coupled with good ball use. I think that's probably something we're definitely lacking, both inside our midfield and just around the ground. Our skills are atrocious, but someone who can deliver the ball inside 50, and he's generally good overhead, which, it becomes even more potent if he grows past 182 centimeters. Like if he's 6'1", that's even better if he's strong overhead. So Sam Walsh's cousin, there is similarities to the way they play, and I think from an attributes point of view, he is able to give us a bit more of a point of difference to what we currently have in our young midfield. And I think what has worked against O'Sullivan is the fact that he's missed a whole chunk of footy this year, and it might lead to us getting a bargain with him. We'll see how the rest of the season pans out, but he's a tough midfielder, versatile, inside-outside balanced, can swing forward. I think this would be a great selection for us if we can make it happen. So let's talk about Jagger Smith. This guy has gotten a lot of attention lately for some big performances, both, in the Coates Talent, every level he's played. The VFL he's now playing at and winning some footy against seasoned men, good in the championships as well. So in the Carnival, he averaged 29 disposals and 7 clearances. He's from Vic Metro, by the way, and a fairly lightly built small midfielder. So currently 181 centimeters again, probably pushes over to that 6 foot mark, but quite skinny. But the thing is that works for him is that he's been able to play against men in the VFL and still win plenty of the football. So he had a 50 disposal game in the Coates Talent League, and I think the following week he backed it up with 40, and his average for that league is 35 disposals a game. So that is probably something that we do need. We need someone who can accumulate the footy. A lot of our young midfielders are probably relatively low possession count midfielders. Even someone like a Harley Reid, certainly at his junior level, we're coming off a week where he's just had 29 touches and 10 clearances. But at junior level, he wasn't putting up 40 disposal numbers. And it's good to have a balance of those kind of midfielders. But he's very crafty at stoppages, very agile, very nimble and able to get out of trouble. He's got quick hands, and those are all good attributes for a midfielder. He's been compared to Connor Rozee. I'm not too sure if I see that. The only issue I have with Jagger Smith is I don't think he's a particularly high meters gained player. He does win contested footy, that's good. It just doesn't have too much potency on the outside to really get the ball from a stoppage situation inside 50. I feel pretty confident he's going to be a good AFL level midfielder, and he's going to be high production and probably one of the first kids you pick up in your fantasy team going into next year. As for West Coast, I think he's relatively low on my list of priorities in terms of his attributes. And like I said, he would add something that we don't have, absolutely. But I think at the talent pool, looking at some of the other players available, I'd prefer someone with a little bit more impact per possession. Let's talk about Sid Draper, and this guy probably has some similarities to Finn O'Sullivan. So he's a 180 centimeter midfielder from SA. So of course he'll naturally go, but still a little bit small, like a number of these prospects are currently. The similarities he has to Finn O'Sullivan is that last year he was unreal. I think he was All-Australian in the championships, bearing in mind he was a year younger, like he was an underage player as a 17-year-old. He was South Australia's MVP, and he was best on ground in South Australia's under-18s grand final last year. So a kid that could play above his level, so to speak. And now we're seeing that as well, where now currently he's playing Sandful and playing pretty well against men. I think he had a game where he had 27 disposals and 10 tackles. So another player like Jagger Smith who can go up a level and still perform well. So what's happened with Draper is that, again, like O'Sullivan, he had an injury-interrupted year. And therefore, in the championships this year, I don't think he was at his best. And I think he's been playing a little bit underdone. I think he averaged 21 disposals and 4 clearances. It's not terrible, but it's kind of modest for a guy you'd expect to be pushing for a top 5 selection in this year's draft. But I do think there's some value there. I think there's some upside, and I think as the season progresses, he could really establish himself in this top 5 or 6. What do we like about Draper? So like I said, he's a little bit small, but he's pretty tough and contested for, a relatively small midfielder. He's one touch, which is also really important, meaning he doesn't double touch the footy too much. He impacts with possession, and he's also got pretty good zippy speed, so he can get out of trouble by foot quite well. So he's fast and he's contested, and those are two things that we have, sort of outlined as values for us in this rebuild previously. At least Simo used to say that. I know Simo's not there anymore, but I imagine our philosophy hasn't changed too much. And his foot skills and his damage, his impact per possession is pretty good. And so I'd probably prefer him over someone like a Jagger Smith at the moment, even though Jagger has had a much more consistent year. I think Draper's injury history means there's still some upside there, and I'm interested in him. Now, if we hold pick 3, there's a lot of suggestion that, Adelaide are very interested in him. I don't know how real that is. But, there's a potential that if Adelaide's really after a Draper, they could trade picks with us and we end up something in the second round. So I just thought I'd add that as a little footnote. But nonetheless, a player that I think probably suits us. Now let's talk about Harvey Langford. This guy has probably shot up more recently. He's a 190 centimetre midfielder from Vic Country. And I think he probably does have some utility to play, either forward or back because he is good overhead. So he's a player that I hadn't really focused on too much or watched that much footage of until the championships. And, even Toomey rated him as the number 4 player. I mean, don't use that as gospel, but that shows how much he's improved recently. And I think he was Vic Country's MVP, and I think he was equal joint winner with Lombard from the Gold Coast Suns Academy for the Lark Medal, the best performed player in the carnival, and I think he averaged about 25 possessions in that, 6 clearances and 6 inside 50s, and he's an interesting one for me, and I think his exact draft range might depend a little bit on athletic testing. I watch him, and he seems to have some speed, like he can run and carry, and he is a very high meters gained player, which I do like for an inside midfielder, because he's got the foot skills, he can hit up long range targets. When you watch him play, it's a little bit like Bont, and I mean more like, it doesn't look like he's fast, but he doesn't seem to be getting caught. And like I said, there is run and carry there, but I'm unsure how athletic he actually is. So again, that one might hinge on athletic testing, but I really do like the idea of Harvey Langford in our midfield. You've got the combination of height, strength, you've got meters gained, which I really like. You've got the ability to rest forward and take marks, which is also a great feature. And you've got performances as well. Like, it's one thing to have attributes, but this guy's actually, winning the football and proving his production. It's not as though he's just got nice traits and winning 17 touches a game. He's actually getting his hands on the footy 26 times a game on average. So I like Harvey Langford as a little bit of a bolter for our selection. And on the topic of bolters, Sam, Lela or Lawler? Toomey is calling him Lawler. I read it phonetically as Lela. You tell me what you think. I'm going to keep calling him Lela for the time being, unless I have, a secondary source tell me that it's Lawler. I don't think it should be Lawler, but let me know in the comments what you think. So he is from Vic Country and a 187 centimetre midfielder forward who can genuinely play in both positions. And compared a little bit to Petrarca, I don't think that is completely apt, but the comparison is there that he's a good, powerfully built inside midfielder who can swing forward and take screamers at the top of the goal square. Very physically developed already, powerful, strong, and genuinely dual positioned. And for a big, powerful young prospect like that, that's really ready-made physically, usually endurance issues come with that. Now, I'm not sure exactly where that sits for him and his testing, etc. But he does still win a fair bit of the footy. I think there was a Coates Talent League game not too long ago where he had about 34 disposals. So playing exclusively midfield in that game, he is still accumulating the footy, and that implies an ability to get around the ground. So the good thing about Lela is that not only is he a pretty prolific midfielder, or solid, not like Jagger Smith prolific, but he can get his hands on the footy plenty. His ball use looks pretty good to me. In terms of like kicking accuracy and trajectory, I think he looks pretty good on that front. But he also creates a mismatch up forward, a little bit like De Goey in that sense. De Goey is obviously an on-baller. You put him on the forward line and you don't really know, is it a medium-sized defender who takes him? They probably not strong enough, maybe not good aerially, but he is. But a key defender would get burnt at ground level for him. So there has been also suggestion that, he could bolt late. I think he's played a lot of cricket growing up, which means there's some upside there from a development point of view. Hasn't put all of his focus into footy at this point. So he could bolt depending on the end of the season. I will also point out he's a great tackler. That's always something you need, defensive running and defensive pressure in a midfield scenario, which we probably lack at this current point in time. So it's a wait and see on Lela. Again, it really depends where our first pick falls, but he could be top 5, absolutely. So we'll round this off by talking about a couple of other players that I don't think are realistic selections, but I will mention them anyway. One of them is Murphy Reid, who is a 180 centimetre currently midfielder forward from Vic Metro, and I think Toomey rated him 5th. So that's why, by virtue of that fact, I'm going to include him in this analysis, but I don't know if it's likely we would take him at pick 2 or 3. Either way, very silky, classy, inside-outside midfielder, I'd say. He's a pretty good ball user, so you probably want him as an advanced midfielder at the stoppage, delivering the ball inside 50. Pretty good at accumulating. I think there was one game I watched earlier, he had 31 disposals against South Australia, had 8 clearances, and kicked 3 goals. And if I'm not mistaken, at least 1 or 2 of those goals were playing as a midfielder. There was one where he got it out of the stoppage and snapped it. He's a very clever player, both by hand and foot. His foot skills are tidy. It's interesting watching him kick because a number of times, not just a few times, you watch and he really loops his kicks, but they always hit a target. I found myself a number of times watching him going, oh, I don't know if he's weighted this perfectly. That was an interesting decision, and then it will just land perfectly on the exact right player. So I maybe would have loved to have seen a little bit more like velocity on the kick, you know, to hit the target at speed. But either way, there's some accuracy there, and he generally does find the target. But he's quite evasive as well and manages to find, you know, space very easily. So I could see this guy starting his career potentially as a halfback flank in the same way that, you know, Holmes is playing right now, because I could see him being a good distributor by foot, but we'll see. I think generally his long-term future is as a midfielder. Averaged 24.5 disposals of the champs, 3 clearances, and a goal a game. I believe he was voted Vic Metro's MVP as well, and he had a pretty good championship. So I thought I'd throw him out there. Probably not a player, you know, if we hold pick 2 that we'd take, but if we do trade down a few selections, 5 or 6, Murphy Reed could come into the picture there. The last one is Luke Traynor, and I think my second most recent Phantom draft, I had him going to West Coast, and I have changed my mind on that. The reason being, he's a 194 centimetre defender from Vic Metro, and I've really come around to this idea that we need to be taking a midfielder. However, key backs, or at least, you know, tallish defenders, are still something we need, and he does have some nice attributes, but again, probably more a trade down option rather than someone we'd take at pick 2 at this stage. Either way, let's discuss him. So Luke Traynor, highest rated tall in this year's draft. It's important to note he's not a true key position defender, which is probably our biggest need. However, what I would compare him to is, you know, Jordan Ridley is a good one, bit of an undersized third tall who can also set up play. Imagine, you know, Josh Rotham, the way that Josh Rotham looked for like a year when we drafted him, and the best possible version of Josh Rotham. Luke Traynor is a better version of that. He's not someone you'd plonk on the opposition's Charlie Curnow, you know, who would just maul him physically. But the ability to intercept and rebound and use the ball by foot, he is a very nice kick of the footy. And again, when we talk about foot velocity or ball velocity and the trajectory of his kicks, they are damaging, and I do think in the modern game there is a place for that. Now, do we use an early pick on a player in the back half, in the back 50? Unless they're like a Wiedering, who is a great actual key defender, probably not. However, we don't know how the draft is going to fall this year. Do we trade this pick down and also end up with a pick for Barras? Do we have 3 picks between 5 and 15? If that's the case, then, you know, my interest in Luke Traynor does increase quite a lot, because I do think we could use a player of this type. It's just probably not worth using our own first round selection in isolation. Look, he's 194 centimeters now, and that could grow to 196, 197. And what we do see, you know, particularly with this taller type, some of them develop physically to become more true key defenders later in their career. So there is a chance that happens for Traynor, but he does have offensive weapons as well, so he might be utilized in that way. So I'm not too sure where he will fall in the draft. I think it will come down to list needs, but, you know, if we hold picks 6, 10, and 15 or whatever happens this year, then I'd probably pull the trigger at pick 10 at the moment, but probably not with our first selection. Cool, so that'll do for the 8 top picks that I have currently in contention for our first selection, bearing in mind not all of those will be pick 2 contenders. Like I said, some of them might be 4, 5, 6, which is still possibly where we're going to end up in this year's draft. Later, I might do a video looking at mid to late first round selection options for us if we do trade down, or even if we don't trade down, like if we get a pick from Hawthorn this year. We'll talk about guys like Toby Travalia, Xavier Lindsay, Taj Houghton, even Bo Allen from Western Australia, and anyone else you want to maybe look at in that particular video. Let me know in the comments. But for now, I hope you got something out of this video. Let me know your own thoughts on who West Coast should pick and who suits West Coast needs. And for now, I'll thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.